Mia, you were never meant to be part of this family's legacy. That's the first thing my mother said to me when I came back to the restaurant on my 27th birthday. No hello, no hug, just a clean cut, straight to the bone. I barely had time to breathe before Luis, my brother, the one who used to guard this place like a temple, looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's for the greater good." Greater good for who? Because it sure wasn't me. The burn of her words was bad enough, but hearing him echo them, that's when I felt something break for good. And yet what they took from me that night wasn't even the worst of it. The restaurant smelled of garlic and cumin, laughter spilling from the dining floor as if nothing had just shattered. My heart thudded against my ribs, already knowing I didn't belong here anymore, at least not in the way they thought. But they had no idea. The girl they pushed out the door wasn't the one who'd be coming back. The glow from the street wrapped around me as I walked inside, past the hum of neon and the throb of salsa beats. Every step pulled me closer to the back office, and to the moment everything started unraveling. If you've ever stood in front of someone you love and realized they've already shut you out, hit like. Maybe you'll feel this with me. Funny how one sentence can rip open a memory you thought you'd buried. 3 years earlier. I'm Mia Torres, and if I close my eyes, I can still smell the mornings of my childhood. Thick, dark Cuban coffee brewing in the kitchen, its scent wrapping around me like a warm blanket. I can still hear the steady rhythm of salsa drifting in from the radio, blending with the sound of Mom's knife chopping onions on the worn wooden counter. Back then, Little Havana felt like the center of the universe, alive with color, heat, and voices spilling into the streets. Our family's restaurant wasn't just a business, it was a heartbeat, a place where my mother, Carmen Torres, ruled with precision and pride. She used to tell me, "Family is everything, Mia," in that firm, no-nonsense tone she used when she wanted me to believe her. And for a long time, I did. I thought family meant unconditional love. I thought it meant belonging. I remember standing on a stool beside her, tiny hands gripping a wooden spoon twice my size, stirring a pot of black beans while the steam curled around my face. She'd glance down at me, correcting my grip, showing me how to fold flavor into food like a secret. But even then, there was a flicker in her eyes, one I didn't understand until much later, something that said, "This is the path you will follow." Only I didn't. When the time came, I traded the scent of slow-roasted pork and garlic for the glow of a computer screen. I chose graphic design over the kitchen, pixels over plates. Mom didn't yell. She didn't need to. The change in her eyes was sharper than any words, cold, distant, like I'd stepped off the family map. Luis didn't have that problem. My older brother was the golden child, the one who never strayed from her vision. Entrepreneur, local success story, the pride of Little Havana. I became the shadow, always chasing approval I never caught. Still, hope has a way of sneaking in, even after years of silence. Tonight is my 27th birthday, and as I walk down Calle Ocho toward the restaurant, the street is alive. Neon lights reflecting off the chrome of parked cars, domino games clattering in the corner plaza, the air thick with the smell of plantains frying. My heart keeps pace with the music spilling from open doorways. Maybe tonight will be different. Maybe tonight she'll look at me and see more than the girl who left the kitchen behind. The restaurant's warm glow pulls me in like it always has. I push through the door, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses wrapping around me. The air is heavy with garlic and cumin. It's like stepping back in time, except something feels off. I slow my steps, eyes scanning the familiar space. The mural of Havana's harbor on the far wall, the string lights that drape over the bar, the photographs of family generations staring down from their frames. And then I see it. On a small table near the center of the room, lit by the soft golden light, sits the family recipe book. Its cover is worn, the leather edges frayed from decades of use. I know every page of it, the neat, looping handwriting of my abuelo, the splashes of oil from years of cooking. It's supposed to be kept in Mom's office, locked away like treasure. Seeing it out here, on display, feels wrong. I freeze, my fingers curling into my palms. Why would she bring it out tonight? A memory presses against my chest. Me at 12, peeking into the book while Mom worked in the kitchen. She'd caught me, snapped the cover shut, and told me, "This is our legacy. You'll understand one day." My eyes moved toward the back of the restaurant, where the kitchen doors swing open and shut with the movement of servers. Through the gap, I catch a glimpse of her, Mom, still graceful in her chef's coat, directing her staff with a tilt of her head, her hair swept back into a perfect bun. She hasn't noticed me yet. I take a step forward, then another, weaving through the tables. My pulse hammers. She called me earlier this week, her voice clipped but different. She said she wanted to celebrate my birthday at the restaurant, just the family. No small talk, no explanation. I tell myself not to overthink it. Maybe she's ready to make peace. Maybe she's finally proud of something I've done. My latest design project was picked up by a local gallery. Luis might have told her. Still, the sight of that recipe book keeps tugging at me, a silent weight in the room. It doesn't belong here, not like this. I pause beside the table, resting my hand lightly on the cover. The leather is warm from the lights above. The air around it feels heavier somehow, as if the book is holding its breath along with me. I glance toward the kitchen again, where Luis has just stepped out, his smile polite but strained as he greets a couple near the bar. He sees me and lifts a hand in greeting, but there's something in his eyes, something that flickers and disappears before I can name it. I swallow hard, forcing a smile back. My voice stays locked inside my chest. The salsa track changes to something slower, the beat rolling like a tide, and I feel the pull of all the years I've spent standing just outside the circle of my family's approval. I straighten my shoulders and start toward the back, toward the office where I know Mom will be. My fingers brush the recipe book once more before I leave it behind. Maybe tonight will be different. Maybe tonight she'll finally see me. But as I push open the office door, a strange unease coils low in my stomach, whispering the question I can't shake. What does Mom really want to celebrate tonight? The restaurant throbbed with life that night, a living thing breathing in the humid Miami air. Outside, the late summer sky had faded into a deep indigo, street lamps casting honey-colored halos over the bustling sidewalks. Inside, the warmth was almost tangible, woven from the chatter of overlapping conversations, the syncopated beat of salsa music spilling from the corner speakers, and the clatter of plates landing on tabletops. The scent of sizzling garlic and onions hit me the moment I stepped from the kitchen corridor, wrapping itself around me like a blanket. Roasted pork, sweet plantains, and a faint whiff of lime from someone's mojito mingled in the air, making the place feel like every Sunday dinner we'd ever had, only amplified 100 times. My heels clicked on the worn terracotta tile, each step carrying me past tables crowded with locals and tourists alike. Waiters wove between chairs with trays balanced in one hand, their movements practiced and fluid, as if the space had its own choreography. Mom's voice rose above it all, cutting clean through the noise. "Mia, come with me." She didn't raise it much, but I heard her, like I always did. I froze for a beat, my pulse skipping. Mom almost never pulled me aside during dinner rush. When she did, it was never for small talk. She was already walking toward the back hallway, her posture purposeful, her black apron swinging slightly with each step. I followed, weaving through the crowded floor, the music fading behind me. The office door shut with a soft click, sealing us off from the world outside. The sudden quiet was jarring. No clinking glasses, no laughter, just the faint hum of the old ceiling fan and the distant thump of bass from the speakers outside. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and lemon polish. Its walls were crowded with framed memories. My grandparents in stiff black and white portraits from the days they first stepped onto American soil, a younger mom in her first chef's coat, pride practically radiating from her smile. Luis at 10, holding a crooked cardboard sign for his lemonade stand, grinning like he'd invented the drink himself. The desk between us was its own kind of chaos, stacks of invoices leaning precariously, a chipped mug still half full of coffee gone cold, a scattering of colored pens that looked like they'd been dropped mid-thought. Mom leaned on the desk, her hands flat against its surface, eyes fixed on mine. "Mia," she said, her voice measured but warm, "I want you to design the logo for our new chain." For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard her right. "You... what?" My voice was barely more than a whisper. Her lips curved into a small, genuine smile. You're good at what you do. I want this to be yours. Our name, our food, our family, out there with your design on it." The words landed in my chest with a weight I didn't expect. For years, my work had been something she tolerated, like a hobby she didn't quite take seriously. Now she was telling me it mattered, that I mattered. I could already see it in my head, my design glowing on signs across Miami, maybe in other cities someday. This could be the moment I'd been waiting for. Yes, of course, I said quickly, my voice catching just enough to betray how much it meant. She nodded, the kind of nod that meant the decision was made. "It's important, Mia. This chain is going to be the future of our family business." Before I could say more, the door creaked open. Luis stepped in, tall enough that his head almost brushed the frame. He wore his usual easy smile, but there was something off about it, like it had been carefully placed there, not grown naturally. "That's great, Mia," he said, his tone just a little too light. "Really great." I turned toward him, searching his expression. His eyes flicked to Mom, then back to me, before sliding down to the floor. He fiddled with the cuff of his sleeve, a habit he'd had since we were kids, one he never broke except when something was eating at him. "Thanks," I replied, but my voice had lost its earlier rush of warmth. He didn't move right away, just lingered in the doorway as though deciding whether to step all the way in. Then, without another word, he stepped back, holding the door open for us. My eyes drifted to the corner of the desk where the family recipe book lay. The leather cover was soft and worn from decades of use, its edges frayed like a favorite coat. It was always kept in a locked cabinet, never just lying around. Seeing it here, exposed and unguarded, made something stir uneasily in my chest. I reached for it almost instinctively, the scent of old paper and cinnamon rising as I lifted it into my arms. We stepped back into the hallway, the music instantly swelling around us again. The air out here felt different, thicker somehow. My earlier excitement hadn't vanished, but now it was threaded through with something else. Luis's smile, forced, almost pained, kept replaying in my mind. Why would he be uneasy about Mom trusting me? I hugged the recipe book closer, its familiar weight pressing against my ribs. This could be my chance to finally belong in this family. So why did it feel like something else was hiding just out of sight, waiting for me to trip over it? The dining area had thinned out, leaving only a handful of regulars lingering at their tables, their conversations hushed to a murmur that blended with the faint hum of the ceiling fans. The overhead pendant lights cast pools of golden light onto the wooden tables, the shadows stretching long and deep between them. In the far corner, the soft, slow notes of a bolero drifted from the speakers, curling around the room like smoke. The air carried the scent of roasted coffee beans and the faint tang of grilled peppers from the kitchen, but underneath it all, there was something else, a stillness, dense and waiting. I sat with my sketchbook open, its pages spread wide like I was offering them up for judgment. Bold colors bled across the paper, gold lettering against a deep teal background, a stylized fork twisting into the shape of a flame. I'd spent hours on these designs, staying up until 3 a.m. with cramped fingers and a buzzing mind, chasing the moment when Mom would see them and approve. That moment was now, and my chest hummed with nervous anticipation. "Okay," I began, clearing my throat. "The first option keeps the flame motif from the original," but before I could finish, Mom lifted her hand. A small, precise movement that sliced my words clean in half. Her palm hovered midair for barely a second, but it carried the same weight as a locked door. "We have bigger decisions, Mia." The way she said it, steady, sharp, left no space for argument. I froze, the tip of my pen hanging above the page, ink pooling slowly into the paper. "Bigger decisions?" She leaned back in her chair, the wood creaking softly under her. Her arms crossed in an easy, almost casual way, but her gaze drifted around the room like she was measuring it, like she was seeing something invisible to me. "We need to talk about restructuring." The word landed heavy, restructuring. It had the polished chill of a corporate boardroom, like the kind of word you use to cushion bad news. My brain scrambled for meaning. Was she talking about changing the menu? Cutting staff? Closing down a location? Across from me, Luis sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it might offer him a way out of this conversation. His untouched coffee sat cooling in front of him. He traced slow circles around the saucer's rim with his thumb, round and round, the same path, over and over, like he was trying to wear a groove into it. I looked at him for some kind of clue, but his eyes stayed down. "What kind of restructuring?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though it came out tighter than I'd planned. Mom's eyes slid back to me, calm but unreadable. "We'll get into the details later. For now, just know that changes are coming." That was all. No specifics, no timeline, just the deliberate, measured tone of someone who had already decided exactly how much they were going to say, and nothing more. Something in my chest shifted, like the floor had tilted beneath me. "Is this about me?" The words came out quieter, almost fragile. "It's about the business, Mia." Her face didn't move, not even a flicker of expression. The silence that followed was so sharp, I could hear the scrape of a fork from somewhere across the room. My gaze wandered to the wall beside us, where rows of family photos lined the wood-paneled surface. Black and white portraits bled into faded color prints, each frozen moment a piece of our history. My grandparents outside their first restaurant, Mom in her first chef's coat, me and Luis as kids holding trays of empanadas that dwarfed our small hands. Tonight, they didn't feel like memories. They felt like an audience. Their smiles, once warm, now seemed carved in stone, watching me with the stillness of a courtroom. Luis finally spoke, his voice low and careful. "It's just, a lot's changing, Mia." I turned to him, searching his face. "Then tell me what's changing." He hesitated. His eyes flicked toward Mom before dropping back to the floor. "Not my place." The words lodged in my chest like a splinter. Not my place. Since when did my brother talk to me like that? Since when was I an outsider in my own family's business? Mom leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her hands folding neatly together. "We'll explain everything when it's time. For now, focus on your designs. They'll still be part of this." Still be part of this. The phrase sounded like a consolation prize, like a pat on the head. The sketchbook felt heavier under my palms. I closed it slowly, pressing my fingers into the cover until my knuckles ached. The bright, hopeful energy I'd brought into this meeting had drained away, leaving behind something restless and raw. The restaurant felt different now, smaller somehow, the corners sinking deeper into shadow. The music still played, but I couldn't hear it the same way. It sounded tinny, distant. Every sound stood out, the scrape of a chair leg, the faint hiss from the kitchen, the clink of glass against wood. I glanced again at the family photos, their frames catching the amber light. But that glow felt false now, almost mocking. They seemed to know something I didn't, something they'd known for a long time. I forced a smile, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. "Right. Focus on the designs." Mom nodded once, as if that settled everything, and reached for her coffee. I sat there with my hands on the closed sketchbook, my heart tapping an unsteady rhythm against my ribs. One thought looped in my head, stubborn and relentless. Why do I feel like I'm the last to know what's happening? I was mid-sentence, my pen tracing a final flourish over the sketch I'd been showing them, when Mom's voice cut through the air. "We need to stop here." It wasn't loud, but it had a weight that flattened everything in its path. The warmth in the restaurant, the faint hum of conversation from the other tables, the soft sway of salsa music overhead, seemed to falter. Her tone was sharp enough to slice through the air and lodge itself beneath my skin. I froze, my pen suspended in midair, the unfinished line trembling. Her eyes met mine. They weren't warm or even annoyed, just cold, unreadable, like polished stone. A pulse of unease ran through me. "What's—" I started, my voice tentative, but she didn't let me finish. "The restaurant's been sold," she said, her words clipped, deliberate, "to a corporation." The syllables landed like stones dropped into still water, each one sending out ripples that crashed against the edges of my mind. The soft salsa music overhead seemed to dim until it was barely a ghost in my ears. Even the clink of silverware and the low hiss from the kitchen faded away, replaced by the sound of my own breathing, shallow, uneven. What? The word came out like it didn't belong to me, weak and trembling, as if my mouth wasn't quite sure how to form it. But she wasn't done. Her gaze didn't waver. "And you were never meant to be part of this family's legacy, Mia. We just didn't have the heart to tell you." The air around me seemed to contract. My ears rang, a high, persistent hum that drowned out the room. My stomach flipped, not sharply, but in a slow, sick churn that made it hard to draw a full breath. Luis shifted in his chair beside her, leaning back until the wood creaked, his arms crossing over his chest. His posture was almost casual, but his eyes stayed down, fixed on a point somewhere near the edge of the table. "It's for the greater good," he said, each word measured, as if he'd practiced them. The greater good. The phrase echoed in my mind, hollow and absurd, bouncing off the raw edges of my disbelief. I turned to him, searching his face for something. Doubt, guilt, a crack in the mask, anything. "You sold Abuelo's legacy without asking me?" My voice snagged on the word abuelo, the syllables thick with a sudden rush of memory, the smell of his kitchen, the warmth of his laugh. Neither of them moved, not a blink, not a breath I could see. The air grew heavier, pressing against my ribs. Behind them, the wall of family photographs loomed larger than it ever had. Abuelo grinning proudly in front of his first food cart, Mom in her chef's coat beside a plate of empanadas, me at 12 holding a tray of pastelitos like it was a crown jewel. Those frozen moments, once my proof of belonging, now felt like silent witnesses to a crime. Their smiles seemed to accuse, their eyes following me, unblinking. My hand trembled as it drifted toward the table's edge, brushing against something solid. The worn leather cover of Abuelo's recipe book, the one he'd placed in my hands on my 16th birthday, his voice warm in my ear. "One day, this will be yours." I slid my fingers across its surface, tracing the grooves where the leather had softened over years of use. It felt heavier now, not just in weight but in meaning, as if it had absorbed every lie they'd ever told me, every truth they'd kept hidden. A rush of heat rose in my face. My chair screeched across the floor as I shoved it back, the sound splitting through the silence like a blade through glass. "Mia!" Mom's voice reached for me, the syllables sharper than before, but they fell short. I couldn't look at her, couldn't risk seeing that cold steadiness again, the calm certainty with which she dismantled my place in this family. I clutched the recipe book to my chest, my knuckles white against the dark leather, and turned toward the door. My footsteps felt too loud in the sudden quiet, each one carrying me further from the people I thought I knew. The photos on the wall stayed fixed in their frames, but I could still feel their gaze pressing into my back, heavy and unyielding. And beneath it all, her words pulsed in my mind, never meant to be part of this family's legacy, like they'd been etched into bone. All these years I'd fought for their approval, and it was never mine to win. The door swung open, and the night air rushed in. It was cool against my skin, but it didn't soothe the burn in my cheeks or the pounding in my ears. I took a step onto the sidewalk, the glow from the street lamps spilling pale circles on the pavement. Behind me, her voice cut through the night again. My name this time, urgent, almost desperate. I didn't turn. I tightened my grip on the book until it felt like it was part of me, the leather edges pressing into my palms, anchoring me to the only piece of truth I had left. And over it all, one question looped endlessly in my head, relentless, unanswerable. Was my whole life a lie? By the time I reached Elena's apartment, the Miami night was a haze of neon glow and the briny tang of sea air clinging to my skin. Her building sat wedged between a corner bodega with buzzing fluorescent lights and a tattoo shop whose window displayed bold, inky designs like promises etched into glass. The stucco walls of the building were cracked and sun-faded, their once bright pastel dulled by years of salt and storms. I climbed the narrow, dim stairwell, each step groaning under my weight, the air thick with the faint scent of fried plantains drifting up from somewhere below. Abuelo's recipe book was pressed tight to my chest, not just an object, but a shield I didn't know how to lower. The door swung open before I could knock. Elena stood barefoot in the frame, her oversized t-shirt flecked with paint, hair pulled into a messy knot that somehow looked intentional. Her expression was steady, eyes soft in a way that made the heat rise in my throat. "You can stay as long as you need," she said, her voice low and certain. No pity, no questions, just an open door and the quiet solidity I hadn't realized I'd been searching for. Inside, her place was small, a single bedroom, a couch slouched in the middle as if it had weathered decades of guests. But the walls were alive with color. Framed art prints leaned slightly crooked, leafy plants cascaded from macrame hangers, a chipped guitar rested in the corner. The balcony door stood open, letting in the warm night breeze and the constant shush of the ocean. The waves rolled in and out, indifferent, their rhythm too steady to match the chaos inside me. I dropped my bag beside the couch and set Abuelo's recipe book on the coffee table. The dark leather seemed almost foreign here, surrounded by Elena's bright ceramics and stacks of sketchbooks stained with smudged graphite. She made tea without asking, and I sat holding the warm mug, watching the steam curl upward until it vanished into the dim ceiling. Somewhere outside, a car stereo pulsed a low bass that vibrated faintly through the floorboards. By morning, the kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and toast. Elena slid a colorful flyer across the table while I was still nursing my first sip. Calle Ocho Festival. Bold letters splashed across a photo of dancers mid-spin, skirts blooming around them in bright reds and yellows. "They're looking for a new logo," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I told them you'd submit one." I started to protest, but her eyes held mine, not sharp, not demanding, but unshakable. "Mia, you need something, even if it's small." Later, I found myself cross-legged on her balcony floor, the sketchpad warm against my knees in the late morning sun. The air smelled of salt and something faintly metallic, the way it does after sea spray settles on metal railings. My pencil moved almost of its own accord, flowing curves for the music, bursts of lines for the swirl of skirts. Seagulls called distantly over the hum of traffic, their voices carried on the heavy air. But as the design began to take shape, so did the ache in my chest. Abuelo would have loved this. He always said street festivals were the heartbeat of the city, loud, messy, alive. My hand slowed, the pencil tip trembling. Then a single tear slipped free, landing on the page and blurring a line into a soft gray stain. I bit my lip hard, willing the rest back, but they came anyway. Hot, unrelenting, spilling faster until my vision was a watery smear. My shoulders shook as I bowed over the sketchpad, hearing the neighbors upstairs burst into laughter. Their joy felt like a cruel reminder of how far I'd fallen from mine. I don't know how long I sat there before my gaze caught a box tucked beneath the coffee table. It didn't match Elena's style. It was a battered cardboard thing, edges frayed, the faint smell of cedar mixed with a whisper of cinnamon rising from it. My breath caught. I knew that handwriting immediately. Mom's. Inside, beneath brittle envelopes and yellowed photos, lay a letter addressed to me. The paper was soft with age, folded so precisely it seemed deliberate. My fingers hesitated before breaking the seam. "Mia, there's a promise your abuelo made, one I've kept hidden until the time was right. It's for you and you alone. I hope one day you'll understand why." That was it. No explanation, no hint of what the promise was, just words that carried a weight too big for the fragile paper. I read them again and again. My fingertip traced the looping curves of her script, as if touch might reveal the missing truth. What promise? Why keep it from me? The city murmured outside. A bus brake hissed at the corner. A vendor's voice rose over the sizzle of something frying. Laughter flared, then faded. The ocean's hush threaded through it all, steady and unconcerned. I felt swallowed by the noise, another drifting shadow among thousands. Elena came in just as the last light of day was turning gold against the buildings. She leaned in the doorway, her bag sliding off her shoulder. "You okay?" I swallowed, my fingers tightening around the letter. "Do you think people can keep a promise for years without telling you what it is?" She tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly in thought. "Depends on the promise and the person." I wanted to spill everything, the restaurant, the letter, the hollow place in me, but the words jammed in my throat. Instead, I slid the letter back into its envelope, the paper sighing softly. Whatever this promise was, it was tied to Abuelo, and maybe, in some tangled way, to why Mom sold the restaurant. That night, I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The balcony door cracked open. The waves whispered through the room, but instead of calming me, they only stirred the question over and over. I'm alone now. But what did Abuelo mean by his promise? The thought didn't comfort me. It pressed against my ribs like something too big to contain. Yet somewhere inside that pressure was the faintest flicker, not quite certainty, not quite warmth, just enough to make me believe I might still find an answer. The Calle Ocho Festival was a living explosion of sound, scent, and color, as if the whole neighborhood had spilled onto the streets to celebrate. Salsa rhythms thumped from every direction, the bass vibrating up through the pavement into my feet. Trumpets cut through the air with brassy bursts, tambourines clattered in sync with clapping hands, and the warm breeze carried the mingled aromas of grilled arepas, fried plantains, and sweet guava pastries. I wove my way through a river of people dressed in reds, yellows, and blues so bright they almost hurt the eyes. Everywhere I looked, there it was, my logo. It glimmered from the glossy banners strung across food stalls, fluttered on the backs of volunteer T-shirts, and even loomed large on the main stage backdrop. The stylized lines and bold lettering were mine, my hands, my vision. I stood still in the middle of the crowd, letting the moment wrap around me. After weeks of feeling like I was sifting through the ashes of my own life, this felt like proof I wasn't done yet. "You're Mia, right? Your logo's a hit." The voice came from a woman darting past in a swirl of skirt fabric and dangling earrings. She flashed me a quick grin but didn't stop, her words tossed casually over her shoulder before she vanished into the shifting tide of people. It shouldn't have hit so hard. Just 4 words, just a design, but it landed deep, solid, like a small stone settling in my chest, a weight I wanted to keep. By the time the festival lights dimmed and the stages emptied, a contract for a small startup's branding project sat tucked inside my bag. Not a big job, not life-changing, but enough. Enough to get me out of Elena's spare room and into a place that belonged to me. Enough to feel like I could start climbing again. The apartment was almost nothing, just 4 walls painted a dull beige, a thin mattress shoved into one corner, a thrifted table with 2 mismatched chairs, and bare windows that framed a sprawl of Miami's skyline, jeweled with scattered points of light. The air inside was warm and faintly stale, holding the scent of dust and someone else's long-ago life. Outside, I could hear the distant pulse of music drifting from another block, a faint, steady heartbeat. I dropped my bag onto the floor, and the sound echoed in the emptiness. Standing there, I let the pride seep in, slow and careful, afraid it might vanish if I grabbed too much at once. I wanted to mark the night with something of my own. I reached into my bag and pulled out Abuelo's recipe book, its worn leather soft and familiar under my fingers. The pages whispered when I flipped to his arroz con pollo, the inked handwriting looping gently across the paper, as if he'd just written it for me yesterday. The ingredients looked simple: rice, chicken, spices, but as I moved around my small kitchen, reality unraveled. The rice clumped too quickly, stubborn and heavy. The chicken browned too fast, edges catching before the inside could cook through. A thin curl of steam carried up, fragrant but wrong. Not bad exactly, but not the scent that lived in my memory. I stirred longer than I needed to, chasing something that wasn't there. When I finally sat down at the little table, the plate in front of me looked fine. But the first bite told me everything. Edible. Not home. I chewed slowly, my fork scraping softly against the plate, and listened. The apartment was mostly silent, save for the hum of a streetlight outside and the faint whir of the fridge. Then, from somewhere down below, an old bolero floated up. A guitar played just slightly out of tune, the kind of melody meant to be listened to with eyes closed. It filled the space enough to keep the loneliness from pressing in too tightly, but it didn't erase it. Pride still pulsed in me, but it was threaded now with an ache I couldn't quite name. Later, when I went to slide the recipe book back into my bag, my fingers brushed the cardboard edges of a box I'd brought from Elena's, Mom's box. I paused, then pulled it closer, peeling back the flaps. A faint scent of cedar and cinnamon rose up, sharp enough to make my chest tighten. Beneath neatly folded letters and brittle papers was a photograph I hadn't seen before. Abuelo stood behind the counter of the restaurant, his posture easy but his eyes holding something more guarded. His arm rested over the shoulder of a man I didn't recognize. The stranger wore a tailored suit that caught the light, his smile stretched tight, polished but not warm. There was a familiarity between them, but not comfort. In the lines of Abuelo's mouth, I could almost see resistance. I turned the photo over. Nothing. No date, no name. Just the heavy silence of unanswered questions. Who was this man? Was he tied to the sale of the restaurant? Was he part of why Mom kept the promise a secret? The thoughts pressed in on me, relentless, as if they'd been waiting for this moment to come alive. I leaned back, photo still in my hand, and stared out at the skyline through the bare glass. Neon signs blinked lazily, casting shifting colors on the buildings below. Laughter drifted faintly from somewhere nearby, but it felt like it belonged to a world I wasn't standing in. I thought, I'm building something new, but the past won't let go. The earlier pride was still there, but smaller now, sitting beside a warmer, heavier thing, resolve. Whatever promise had been made, whatever betrayal hid beneath it, I wasn't going to keep living in the dark. I slid the photo between the pages for arroz con pollo and flan, closing the book with a quiet, deliberate thud. It felt heavier now, as if the truth itself had weight. Outside, the city kept breathing, horns in the distance, the murmur of voices from the street, the slow slap of waves against the shore. I let the sounds wash over me, the recipe book resting in my lap, my fingers firm around its cover. Somewhere in that blend of hope and ache, I made a silent vow. I would stand on my own, and I would find out who that man was, no matter what it cost. The cafe sat wedged between two sun-bleached surf shops, its weathered wooden sign swaying gently in the ocean breeze. A faint squeak echoed each time the sign swung, almost in rhythm with the distant, muffled crash of waves. The salty air pressed against my face as I pushed the door open, carrying with it the faint scent of kelp and sun-warmed sand. Inside, the lighting shifted instantly, soft and uneven, streaming through slatted blinds that striped the worn wooden floor in alternating bands of gold and shadow. The air was warm, scented with rich espresso and a trace of sea salt that clung stubbornly to the back of my throat. Somewhere behind the counter, the espresso machine hissed sharply, followed by the metallic clink of cups. Mom was already there, tucked away at a corner table with her back to the panoramic glass wall that framed the churning sea. Her coffee cup sat in front of her, porcelain white against the deep brown of the table, steam rising in thin, wavering ribbons that curled and vanished into the air. She looked up as I approached. Her face was perfectly arranged, polite, calm, unreadable. It was a look I'd known my whole life, the mask she wore when she didn't want me to see past her surface. I slid into the chair opposite her, the legs scraping lightly against the floor. My bag dropped beside me with a soft thud. Inside, between the brittle pages of our family's recipe book, Abuelo's letter waited, its folded paper somehow heavier than anything else I carried. That weight pressed into me now, settling in my chest as if daring me to speak. For a moment, silence stretched between us, filled only by the lazy whir of the ceiling fan and the distant cry of seagulls outside. The air seemed thicker here, every sound muffled under the steady boom of the waves. "I need to ask you something," I said at last, my voice quieter than I intended. It felt like the sound dissolved before it reached her, lost in the hum of the cafe. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup, knuckles paling slightly. "Go ahead," she said, her tone even, almost rehearsed. "Why did you sell the restaurant?" Her lips pressed together, forming a thin, unyielding line. "We've talked about this." "No." My words cut through hers, sharper than I'd expected. "You told me why you thought it was necessary. I'm asking why you decided without telling me, without telling anyone." She glanced past me, out the window, her gaze following the slow rhythm of the tide. "I thought you weren't ready." The words landed like a cold slap. "Not ready? To take over my own family's restaurant?" "Mia," she began, but I didn't let her finish. "You made that choice for me." Her eyes snapped back to mine. For the first time, a flicker of irritation cracked through her calm. "I made that choice for us. You don't understand what it takes to keep something like that alive. The late nights, the constant debt, the—" "I understand more than you think," I said, leaning forward slightly. My fingers brushed the edge of my bag, feeling the faint outline of the folded paper inside. "Abuelo left a letter. Did you know that?" The change in her was small, almost invisible, but I saw it. The subtle lift of her shoulders, the way her grip on the cup shifted, tightening just enough to make her thumb tremble. "What letter?" she asked too quickly. "Don't do that," I said softly. "Don't pretend you don't know." The steam from her coffee had thinned, leaving the surface dark and still. She stared at it as if it might hold an answer she couldn't give me. "I did what was best for us," she said finally. Her voice trembled just enough for me to hear it. I searched her face, trying to catch the truth before it slid away. Something flickered there. Fear, maybe, or guilt, but it vanished almost as soon as I saw it. "What was in it that scared you?" I asked. Her eyes dropped to her cup again, fingers tightening until her nails pressed white against the porcelain. "You're letting your imagination run wild," she murmured. "I'm going to hire a lawyer," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, part threat, part promise. "I want to know exactly what my rights are." She froze. The cup hovered an inch above its saucer, her hand trembling slightly. In that moment, it wasn't the words that mattered. It was the way her body betrayed her, the way the control she clung to seemed to crack at the edges. "Mia!" she started, but whatever she meant to say dissolved before it formed. The longer I pushed, the more she seemed to pull away, like the tide retreating and leaving nothing behind but wet sand and questions. I stood. The chair legs scraped loudly against the floor, turning a few heads nearby. "If you won't tell me, I'll find out myself." Her eyes followed me, but she didn't call me back. When I opened the door, the sunlight hit me full in the face, warm and almost blinding. The wind caught my hair and filled my lungs with sharp, briny air. My heart was racing, not from fear alone, but from something sharper. Resolve. She was hiding something, and I wasn't going to stop until I found it. I glanced back once. Through the window, Mom was still sitting there, her coffee untouched, her gaze locked on it like it might eventually tell her what to do. The sea behind her churned, restless and loud, the waves hitting the rocks with a force that seemed to echo the pounding in my chest. I turned away, the wooden boards of the boardwalk creaking under my steps, the sound of the waves chasing me as if they knew I was walking straight into the storm. The storm had rolled in like a living thing, swallowing the horizon under a sky bruised purple and charcoal. The wind carried a sharp, salt-heavy bite, driving rain sideways in relentless sheets. From the street, the cafe's glass wall shimmered under the assault, each drop exploding against it like tiny, desperate fists. The light inside was low and amber, pooling in soft circles on each table, but it couldn't keep the chill from sliding under my skin. Every inhale carried the mingled sense of bitter coffee, wet wool, and the faint metallic tang of the ocean. Mom was already there, exactly where she always sat on Sunday mornings when things were still simple. The same corner table, but she seemed smaller now, her shoulders tight and drawn in, as if she could shrink into the wooden chair and vanish. Her hands rested on either side of a porcelain cup, steam curling upward in delicate tendrils, trembling every time the wind rattled the window. She didn't look up when I walked in. I slid into the seat across from her. My fingers were clenched so tightly around the envelope that the paper had gone soft at the edges. Abuelo's steady, faded handwriting, staring back at me like a quiet accusation. I set the letter down between us. Her eyes flicked toward it, then away again, as if the sight burned. "You've read it," I said. My voice was flat, but it carried more weight than I intended. She hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. Instead, she reached for her coffee, lifted it halfway, and set it back down untouched. The rain hammered harder against the glass, a relentless rhythm that matched the pulse in my ears. I didn't wait for her to gather her thoughts. From my bag, I pulled the thin folder I had found hidden inside Abuelo's recipe book the night before. Its manila surface was worn at the corners, the faint smell of old paper clinging to it. My hands trembled slightly as I placed it on the table and flipped it open. "This isn't just about the letter," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut through the thick air between us. "This," I tapped the top page, "is the real truth." Her gaze dropped to the document, and for a moment she didn't breathe. I slid the first page toward her, the cafe's dim light catching on the black typewritten lines. Even without reading, she seemed to flinch. Luis partnered with the corporation 3 years ago, I continued, each word tasting like rust on my tongue. Before the sale, before any of us even knew the land was in danger, and he used the money to fund his own project. Her fingers twitched above the paper, curling back as if touching it would make the betrayal solid and undeniable. "Mia," she began softly, "don't." My interruption came faster than I expected, sharper than I wanted. My throat felt tight, my heart hammering so hard the table seemed to vibrate beneath my palms. I drew a slow breath, knowing the next blow would cut deeper than anything so far. "That's not the worst part." She finally looked at me, her eyes glassy under the muted light. The sound of the storm swelled in the silence between us. "Tia Rosa knew," I said, the words landing like stones. "She's known this whole time, and she stayed quiet because Luis promised her a cut." The space between us felt like it had collapsed into something suffocating and airless. Somewhere across the cafe, a spoon clinked against a mug. Absurdly ordinary against the world, I felt crumbling. Mom's lips moved, struggling into shape. "Mia, don't blame Tia. Her voice faltered for a moment, then steadied in a way that made me want to recoil. "We were protecting the family." Protecting. The word echoed inside me, jagged and wrong. I pushed my chair back, its legs scraping loud against the wooden floor. I leaned forward, both hands flat on the table. "Protecting," I repeated, my voice trembling but cutting through the low hum of the cafe. "By betraying me?" Her expression broke, a visible fracture across her face, but I couldn't stay to watch it. My pulse roared in my ears, louder than the thunder cracking overhead. I grabbed Abuelo's recipe book from the table, the leather warm from where it had sat in the cafe's heat. I held it close to my chest, feeling the familiar worn ridges under my fingertips, the only thing that still felt untouched by lies. I turned toward the door, the bell above it chiming frantically as the wind caught it. The rain hit me instantly, cold needles slicing through my clothes, but I barely felt the sting. My breath came in short, uneven bursts, my body propelled forward by something deeper than anger. Luis with his ambition, Tia Rosa with her silence, Mom with her excuses. One by one, they had turned away from me. I pushed through the gusting wind, the street around me smeared in rain and neon reflections. My shoes splashed through shallow puddles, each step a sharp punctuation against the night. And under the rage, there was something else, small, fierce, unyielding. If they thought I would crumble, that I would let their secrets bury me, they were wrong. I tightened my grip on the recipe book until the leather dug into my palms. The storm could rage on all it wanted. I was already moving forward, even if I had to cut my path through the wreckage they'd left behind. And beneath it all, colder than the rain sliding down my spine, a single question whispered, "Who else knew?" The night had pressed Miami into silence, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Far from the neon hum of Ocean Drive, the beach stretched in an endless ribbon of silver and shadow. The moon hung low, casting a cold, milk-white light that made the crests of the waves glisten like glass before they broke with a soft, unhurried hiss. The air was heavy with salt, its tang settling on my lips and clinging to my hair, dampening each strand until it stuck to my cheeks. I sat cross-legged on the damp sand, my jeans cuffed to keep them out of the tide, though the wind had already carried flecks of spray onto the fabric. The recipe book rested in my lap, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. Moonlight caught along the edges, turning them to silver, as if the night itself had chosen to crown it. My fingertips traced its ridged surface absent-mindedly, mapping each crease the way I used to trace the folds of origami paper under Tia Rosa's patient instruction. Her hands had been warm then, her voice slow and steady, the syllables rolling like the tide. "Despacio, mija. Let the paper breathe." I could still see the soft slope of her shoulders as she leaned over me, guiding my fingers. Now those memories felt paper-thin and razor-sharp, edges I couldn't touch without bleeding. A gust tugged at my hair, sending strands across my mouth. I tasted salt, though I couldn't tell if it came from the sea or my own tears. I didn't move to push them away. My body felt too heavy for small gestures. I had been holding too much for too long. Anger, confusion, the quiet grief of realizing the people who raised you could look you in the eye and lie without flinching. The moment was split by a faint buzz against the sand. My phone lay face down beside me, its muted vibration almost lost beneath the waves. For a second, I considered letting it pass unanswered, but when I turned it over, the name on the screen made my stomach clench. Mr. Sandoval, attorney. I swiped before I could think. It wasn't a call, just a message. A single sentence, clean and merciless. The will was clear, equal shares. I stared at it. The words didn't move, but they seemed to grow heavier, denser, each letter pressing against my chest. Equal shares. Abuelo had written it down, sealed it in a document designed to outlast disputes and tempers. Equal. And still, Mom and Tia Rosa had buried it, twisted the truth until Luis stood alone at the top while I stood empty-handed. I read it again, then again. Each repetition deepened the cut. This wasn't an oversight or misunderstanding. It was a choice. A deliberate, quiet decision to erase me. A short, bitter laugh scraped out of my throat. So that was what protecting the family meant to them. Protecting the version of family they could control. The one that didn't need my name carved into its foundation. I reached into my tote bag and drew out the old sketch I had been carrying like a talisman. It was the logo I had designed for the restaurant's rebranding. Sleek, modern, with a nod to Abuelo's first menu etched in its lines. Every stroke had been meant to honor him, to carry his spirit forward. My thumb smudged a charcoal line, and I realized my hand was trembling. The paper felt lighter now, as if the betrayal had thinned it. I held it up to the moonlight, my vision blurring at the edges until the design seemed to waver. And then, slowly, I folded the paper once, not to protect it, but to weaken it. The first tear was quiet, a dry whisper in the night. I tore it again and again. Shards of paper scattered across my lap, jagged edges catching the breeze. I stood, the sand cold under my bare feet, and let the fragments slip from my fingers. The wind caught them, carrying some toward the water, while the waves reached greedily for the rest. They disappeared without hesitation, swallowed into the dark as though they had never existed. I watched until the last scrap was gone, until there was nothing but the rhythm of the tide sliding in and out. The ocean didn't care about my loss. It took what it was given and moved on, unburdened. Somewhere in that emptiness, something inside me shifted. Not a light, not yet, but heat. A thin, coiled thread of defiance wound itself tight in my chest. I might never have their blessing. I might never be welcomed back into their version of the family, but I didn't need their version to define me. I pressed my palm against the recipe book, feeling its weight against me. This was mine. The notes in the margins, the smudges from oil and sauce, the handwriting only Abuelo and I could read. This was the true inheritance. Not the building, not the name above the door. The tide crept forward, soaking the hem of my jeans with cold that bit through to the skin, but I didn't move. The chill kept me grounded, sharpened my thoughts. One question pressed forward, stubborn and sharp. Who else knew? If Mom and Tia Rosa had hidden the will, who else had kept silent? Had someone watched me fight for scraps knowing all along I was entitled to more? How deep did this rot run? The moonlight spilled across the wet sand, painting it silver like the recipe book's cover. For a fleeting moment, I imagined Abuelo beside me, silent but present, the way he had always been when words failed. In my mind he nodded, not in pity, but in pride. The wind rose again, rattling the surface of the water. I tucked the recipe book under my arm, holding it like a promise. The storm inside me wasn't over, but its shape was changing. Turning from the shoreline, I walked toward the darker stretch of beach, each step leaving deep prints in the sand. The tide would claim them soon, but in that moment they were proof I was still here, still moving. They could keep their table. I would build my own, piece by stubborn piece, until I didn't need their seats or their approval. Behind me, the waves kept their secrets. The night kept mine. The morning light in Miami doesn't simply slip into a room. It charges in, relentless and warm, spilling across every surface as if it's determined to bleach away the shadows. My apartment drank it in greedily. Golden beams slid across the polished wood floor, glinting off glass jars crammed with brushes, scattering over half-finished sketches taped to the wall, their edges curling in the salt-heavy air. The cobalt streaks on my latest canvas caught the sun and shimmered, while deep crimsons seemed to pulse with their own quiet heat. It was as if the ocean had wandered in and decided to stay, breathing color into every corner. The space was small, barely enough room for the easel, my desk, and the narrow table shoved under the window, but it pulsed with energy. The faint scent of linseed oil clung to the air, mixing with the ghost of yesterday's espresso. Fabric swatches fanned out across a corkboard like tiny flags from a country I was still inventing. My laptop hummed softly on the desk beside a mug of coffee gone lukewarm, and next to it sat 2 contracts, their ink still sharp from yesterday's signing. One was from a boutique hotel that wanted a sprawling mural for their rooftop bar, something bold and alive, they'd said, something that would make guests stop mid-drink to stare. The other was from a tech startup in the district, chasing a fresh visual identity to match their ambitious rebrand. The pay wouldn't make me rich, but it was enough. Enough for rent. Enough for new brushes and pigments without checking the price tag twice. Enough to keep my independence mine. I'd chosen this life deliberately, even when the easier path had been laid in front of me. I had walked away from the inheritance, not out of pride, but because I knew what it would cost me. The money from the restaurant wasn't just currency, it was a chain, a reminder that I'd been erased from my own history. Taking it would have meant living under a ceiling built by the same hands that had pushed me out. And so I left it behind for this messy, bright, imperfect space that was mine alone. But the past had a way of sneaking back in through the quiet. Last night, in that hazy drift between dreaming and waking, I saw her. Not the brittle, sharp-edged woman from the months after the will, but my mother as she used to be, hair tied back with a patterned scarf, a wooden spoon in her hand, standing over a pot of arroz con leche. Steam swirled around her face, softening every line, and the kitchen light caught in her eyes. They weren't hard. They weren't cold. They were heavy, sad, as though she was seeing something broken she couldn't mend. She didn't speak, but the air between us was thick with words unsaid. I woke with the faint taste of cinnamon on my tongue, my chest aching in a way that no amount of contracts or colors could soothe. Was I too harsh? Had I left too soon? The questions hovered like gnats as I poured fresh coffee, as I adjusted the easel, as I pressed the first stroke of paint onto the canvas. By afternoon, while waiting for a file to upload for a client, I found myself scrolling the news. And then, there it was. Luis Rivera's flagship project collapses amid lawsuits. The photo was unforgiving. Luis standing in front of the half-finished building, dark sunglasses hiding his eyes, his jaw tight as though bracing for a punch he couldn't dodge. The article unraveled a tangle of mismanaged funds, failed deadlines, and bitter investors. For a moment, just a flash, I felt it. Satisfaction. The sharp, almost metallic taste of seeing a bully trip over his own ego. But it vanished as quickly as it came, leaving behind an echo of emptiness. His downfall didn't restore my place in the family. It didn't erase the pain. It was just another crumbling wall in a house I'd already walked away from. I shut the tab, opened another. My blog filled the screen, a quiet project I'd begun weeks ago, a space to write about surviving betrayal and the slow, uneven work of rebuilding. I hadn't promoted it, but somehow the posts had begun to find their way to people who needed them. The comments section was proof, lines of text from strangers whose words trembled with the same hurt, the same longing for something steady after the storm. One comment held me still. "Your blog helped me face my own family drama. I didn't know how to walk away, but you made me believe I could." I read it again and again. My throat tightened. These people didn't know me beyond the pieces I'd shared, but their voices met mine in a space untouched by old grudges. Together we were building something without history's poison, connection untainted by betrayal. I looked up from the screen. Around me, my apartment glowed in the late light. A large canvas spilled the golds and reds of a Miami sunset, almost too vivid to look at straight on. Smaller works leaned in clusters against the wall. Graffiti-inspired abstracts from Wynwood, a framed print of a wave breaking fierce and white against dark stone. Every wall here was alive, nothing like the restaurant's muted grays and suffocating curtains where air felt thick with expectation and control. I wasn't naive. The pain didn't vanish just because I'd painted over it. Some mornings I still woke with my jaw locked tight, my hands curled as if bracing for a fight. Some afternoons, the memory of my mother's voice could halt me mid-step, but every day I returned to the easel. I answered emails. I sent invoices. I replied to strangers who saw their own scars in mine. I was free, but her face, the one from my dream, eyes clouded with sadness, wouldn't leave me. I sat at my desk, tracing the chipped rim of my coffee mug, letting the sounds outside drift in, a car horn 2 blocks away, the faint rhythm of footsteps on the sidewalk, a burst of laughter that rose and fell like a wave. The world went on, whether I stepped into it or not. In that quiet, I felt both the weight of what I'd left and the lightness of what I'd built. I had something worth keeping now, yet some part of me still wondered, was there a door left open somewhere in the wreckage of all that had broken? And if there was, would I ever find the courage to knock? For now, the colors waited. And so did I. The air outside the restaurant was heavier than I remembered, thick with the damp warmth of early evening. The street was quieter now, as if it had been holding its breath all these years, waiting for me to return. The carved wooden sign that once swung above the entrance, its edges worn smooth by decades of wind, was gone. In its place, a sterile, backlit corporate logo glowed in cold, clinical white against the expanse of dark glass. It was so sharp, so precise, it nearly erased the memory of warm garlic and fresh cilantro that used to drift out the door and follow me home from a block away. Inside, the transformation was complete. The creak of the old wood floors had been replaced by the echo of footsteps on polished concrete. Pendant lights hung in perfect rows from the ceiling, casting pale circles of light that seemed too calculated, too symmetrical to be welcoming. Tables were identical, lined up like soldiers, with no mismatched chairs chipped from years of shifting beneath the weight of late-night laughter. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, not of broth simmering for hours or dough frying in hot oil. It felt filtered, almost artificial, as if nothing messy or human had ever existed here. She was waiting at the farthest booth, the one tucked into the corner where the shadows gathered. My mother. She sat upright, her back straight, her hands folded neatly on the table as though she'd been rehearsing this moment. Her hair, once a thick river of jet black, was streaked with silver now, drawn into a bun that looked too neat, too deliberate. A pale scarf rested loosely around her neck despite the room being warm. Her fingers moved slowly, twining and untwining like restless vines, searching for something to cling to. "Mia," she said when I slid into the booth across from her. Just my name, no smile, no warmth, delivered in a voice weighed down with something I couldn't yet name. I didn't answer. My gaze wandered to the counter where I used to balance on a stool, peeling shrimp beside her, sneaking bites of fried plantains when she turned her back. That counter was gone now, too, replaced by a sleek espresso machine that hissed in short, mechanical bursts. The sound felt foreign here. She cleared her throat. "I asked you here because I need to tell you the truth." The word truth fractured in her voice, and my stomach tightened as if bracing for impact. "I knew about the will," she said, her eyes fixed on the spotless tabletop. "I found it before your father passed, and I hid it. I thought Luis would take care of the business better, that he'd protect you in his own way." I blinked at her. Protect me? By erasing me? Her shoulders tensed. She didn't look away. "I was wrong. I see that now. And I am sorry." The apology sounded foreign, like a phrase she had borrowed but didn't quite know how to use. It hung between us, fragile and incomplete. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. Somewhere above us, the lights hummed faintly. From the back kitchen came the muffled clang of metal against metal, an alien echo that had none of the chaotic warmth I remembered. She spoke again, softer this time. "I'm looking for a new apartment. Something smaller. I can't stay with Luis anymore." Her fingers found the edge of her scarf and twisted it. "I need help." The words settled on me like a weight. I exhaled slowly. "I'll help you find a place," I said, keeping my voice even. "But that's it. No strings, no control. I'm not your little girl in the kitchen anymore." Her head dipped, the bun tilting forward as though my words had physically pressed her down. She didn't argue. She didn't offer another excuse. For the first time I could remember, my mother stayed silent. I studied her in that stillness, watching the light from the glowing sign outside trace faint lines across her face. Lines carved by years of choices, of stubbornness, of love expressed the wrong way. There was no undoing what she had done. No way to rewrite the years I had spent clawing my way out from under her shadow. A server appeared quietly and set a glass of water in front of me. The surface rippled, bending the reflection of her face into something unrecognizable. I reached into my bag and pulled out the recipe book. The leather cover was worn to softness, its corners rounded from years of flour-dusted fingers turning its pages. Inside were smudged notes, ink blurred by sauce stains, margins filled with little reminders in her cramped handwriting. It was our history, messy, imperfect, but ours. I slid it across the table. Her eyes lifted, startled. "It belongs here," I said. Her hand came to rest on the cover, trembling slightly. Her mouth opened, but no words emerged. She simply looked down at the book as though it were something sacred, something she'd nearly lost forever. I stood. The legs of my chair scraped softly against the polished floor, the sound small but final. For a heartbeat I hesitated, watching her bow her head over that book as if it might still hold answers. Outside, the golden light of evening had deepened, stretching shadows across the street. I stepped into it, the humidity wrapping around me like an old familiar blanket. Behind me, the cold white glow of the new sign cut through the dusk, sharp and unyielding. I forgave her in that moment, not for her sake, but for mine. But the memory of what she had taken from me, the years it had cost, would not fade. As I walked away, the image stayed vivid. My mother, silent before the book that had outlasted our trust. It wasn't an ending, not yet. But maybe, in some fragile, unspoken way, it was a beginning. Morning light spills through the wide windows of my studio, a warm gold that seems to melt into the walls and wake the colors sleeping in the canvases. Every brush stroke catches the light differently, some glowing, some shadowed, like they're alive. The smell of acrylic still lingers from last night's work, blending with the rich aroma of fresh coffee drifting from the small kitchen in the back. The hum of the city outside is faint, softened by the thick glass, but it's there, a reminder that beyond these walls, Miami is moving, breathing. Two of my interns sit at the main desk, shoulders close, eyes locked on a laptop screen. They're fresh out of art school, both still carrying that restless energy of people who believe anything is possible. I hear snippets of their debate, fonts, color palettes, layout balance, punctuated by bursts of laughter. It's not the kind of laughter that fills a room. It's lighter, easier. The sound of belonging. I glance at my sketchbook on the center table. The page is half covered with the outline of a new logo for a young photographer who came in last week, her hands trembling around a portfolio she treated like it was glass. She had that look I recognize, the fear of being dismissed, of being told she isn't enough. I know it well. She's not the only one. People bring me their fragile beginnings, and together we make them strong enough to stand in the open. The blog started as a whisper. I thought it might just be a quiet space to spill my story, nothing more. But now, it's become something I can't quite name. Every morning, my inbox fills with strangers' voices, people who've been betrayed by family, people who left everything behind, people who write not for advice, but to be heard. One comment from last night lingers. "Your story gave me courage to move on." I read it 3 times before closing the laptop, each time feeling the words land heavier. It's strange, how pain can be the same in 2 different hearts, and how sharing it can make both feel lighter. By late afternoon, the studio quiets, sunlight shifts, turning honey soft as it slides across the floorboards. Outside, Little Havana is starting to hum louder, the street alive with vendors' voices and the scent of fried plantains curling through the air. I lock up, sling my bag over my shoulder, and walk the few blocks home. Warm air wraps around me, thick with the faint spice of cigar smoke from the corner shop. The balcony is waiting. I step out and lean on the railing, the city stretching below like a living mosaic. Neon signs blink awake one by one. Strings of warm bulbs crisscross patios packed with chatter, and cars slide past in streaks of white and gold. Somewhere, faint but clear, a saxophone plays, the notes lazy and low, drifting upward into the humid night. Inside, the recipe book lies open on the counter. The page for arroz con pollo is worn soft at the edges, an old oil stain marking the bottom corner. My mother's handwriting still loops neatly beside a note about seasoning. I let my finger rest there for a moment. It's not longing anymore. It's something else. Recognition. These words used to belong to her. Now, they belong to me too. I rinse the rice until the water runs clear, tipping it into the pot to toast. The grains crackle softly against the metal, a sound that somehow feels like home. Garlic meets hot oil with a sharp hiss, the scent blooming instantly, wrapping around me. I add the chicken, watching as the skin deepens into a color like antique brass, the edges curling slightly. Every movement is muscle memory, but it's mine now. My hands, my timing, my kitchen. Steam begins to rise, carrying the dish's warmth toward the balcony. I set the pot down on the small table outside, its heat soaking into my forearms as I serve the first spoonful. The bite is perfect. Tender chicken, savory rice, the brightness of fresh cilantro cutting through, and it tastes free. Leaning back in my chair, I let my eyes wander over the streets below. Life is moving everywhere, laughter spilling from open windows, headlights sliding across wet pavement, the saxophone still weaving through it all. I breathe it in, and the truth sits quietly inside me. The pain broke me once, but it didn't leave me hollow. It built me, strong enough to walk away, strong enough to rebuild from nothing, strong enough to be here now, in a city that feels like a heartbeat, knowing exactly who I am. The betrayal didn't erase me. It shaped me. It carved out space for a version of myself I never would have met otherwise. Somewhere out there, someone else is standing on the edge of their own break. They're wondering if it's possible to be whole again. If you're hearing this now, maybe that someone is you. I want to hear your story. How have you overcome family hurt? Share it in the comments below. Your words might be the bridge someone else needs. Let's piece these fragments together. Yours, mine, all of ours, and see what we can build. Because sometimes the cracks in us aren't where we end. Sometimes they're where the light gets in. Like this video, subscribe, and check out more stories of resilience. No one should have to rebuild alone.